Now that you've centered your clay, it's time to start actually doing the throwing process. The throwing process is how we open up and we raise our clay up and before we can start to form it. When I'm going to make several pieces at one time, when I'm throwing, I always want to make sure I have a couple of pieces of clay prepped and ready to go so that I don't need to constantly get up and rework clay into form a ball. So I've got several set aside, ready to throw. And I've got this one centered already so that we can just focus on the throwing process. So when we go to first open up our clay, we want to make sure our wheel is going full speed. I take my foot off the pedal just to make sure I'm not changing my speed accidentally as I go. So again, making sure the clay is wet, my hands are wet. I'm going to take my hands and gently put them on both sides. I'm going to put my thumbs together. And I'm going to find the middle by pressing my thumbs down into the top of the clay, and then this little piece forms at the top. I want to push my fingers to the middle until that doesn't exist anymore, and that's how I know I'm in the center. Once I'm in the center, I can take my thumbs and I can push in to create a little indent. As I feel the clay start to dry out, I want to get a little bit of water and put it in there. Then I'm going to take my thumbs and I'm just going to push straight down. Again, making sure I anchor my thumbs against each other, elbows still tight into my hips. Okay, and now I have that entry hole. What I want to do now is I will probably need to make this a little bit deeper because my thumbs don't go all the way in. So I'm going to take my right hand, I'm going to take my middle finger and my ring finger, and I'm going to put those in the middle where my thumbs were. Using my other hand, I'm just going to press down a little bit to push further down. And then what I want to do is I want to leave about 1/4 of an inch between the bat and the bottom of the clay. So the way to check that is to use my needle tool. I'm going to stop the wheel. I'm going to press my needle tool into my clay, then I'm going to slide my finger down until it touches the clay. Once it does that, I'm going to hold it to the needle tool, pull both out, and then I can see that I have this much clay between the bat and the bottom of the inside of my clay. So I can make this just a little bit thinner by pushing down a little bit more, which I'll also need to do to close the hole where my needle tool was. So this is probably just a little too big for what I want. So again, I'm going to put the same 2 fingers in the middle, press down just a little bit, 1 to close that needle tool hole, and 2 to make that thinner, a little bit thinner. Once I have that entry hole, I want to open up the bottom without making the top any wider. So using the same 2 fingers, I'm just going to pull my fingertips across the bottom of the clay so that they curve back around. So if this is the bottom of the clay and these are my fingertips, I'm just pulling them like this so that the bottom of the clay stays flat on the inside and the top doesn't open any wider. Okay, and then I'm going to just run my fingers back and forth across the bottom to compress the bottom and make that clay nice and tight. Once I have that opening at the bottom and my opening at the top hasn't changed, now I'm ready to start getting some height on the clay. To do that, I need the same 2 fingers on the inside, and on the outside I'm going to use my index finger and my thumb. So I'm going to put my thumb in tight to my hand, and then I'm going to wrap my index finger around the top of my thumb like this. And I'm going to end up using this part of my finger in order to help lift the clay. So again, when I do this, my clay at this point has been going full speed. Now I want to slow it down to about half speed. The reason I want to do this is if I keep it at full speed and I start throwing as it gets thinner, it wants to move out. So I want to slow the speed down to try and keep it in. Make sure the clay is wet, make sure my hands are wet so that the clay moves smoothly through. And now I'm going to do this on the right side of the clay, between the right side and right in front of me in this area, because I want the clay moving out of my hands. I don't want it moving into my hands. If I did it on this side and it moved into my hands, I'd gouge the clay out. Whereas over here, the clay is moving out of my hands and I'm more likely to just guide it. Okay. So again, index finger around my thumb, these hands on the inside, and I'm going to rest my left thumb on my right hand so that when I press the clay and start lifting on the outside, both hands move at the same speed. Okay, and a little bit of clay might peel off, and that's okay. So that evens out the outside, evens out the inside a little bit. Now we need to do this again to try and get a little bit more height. So when I do this, I want to make sure that I'm lifting my hands slowly and at the same rate. So I pinch in a little bit so that you can see this divot underneath. And then slowly lift up towards my face. Making sure I have that same compact shape that I had when I was centering. And when I get to the top, I'm going to ease my pressure just a little bit because I want to make sure the top doesn't get any super thin. Okay. Notice I came straight up towards my face, so this stays nice and narrow. I can probably do one more pull. And as this gets deeper, rather than just these two fingers on the inside because I can't reach the bottom, I'm going to stick my whole hand in, but I'm still going to keep that thumb resting on the outside so that both hands move up at the same rate, same pace. One of the things you'll notice if you go slowly enough, you'll see these lines on the outside and on the inside. Those are my throwing lines. And what those tell me is that if they're the same distance apart all the way down, that means I came up at the same slow, steady speed the whole time. Okay. So now I'm just going to compress my rim a little bit by taking my left index finger and thumb, putting them on the outside, taking my right index finger, and I'm just pressing down. That just makes the rim of my clay a little bit thicker and a little bit stronger. Okay. So now that I have a cylinder, I want to check to make sure my walls are good thickness. So while it's still spinning, I'm going to take my sponge and get the water out of the inside. I'm going to use my wire tool to cut my cylinder in half. When I go to cut my cylinder in half, I want to take my wire tool, make sure it's stretched tight, hold it down to the bat on the opposite side of my piece than I am, pull it towards me till it gets into the middle, and then lift straight up. What this will do is I can now take this half of my cylinder and pull it back, and I can see that my bottom is flat and has good even thickness across. My walls are a little bit thicker at the bottom than they are on top, and that should get it. That's how it should be. Okay, should be a little bit thicker at the bottom because we're going to end up trimming that off, and it should get a little bit thinner as it comes towards the top. Okay, and I want to practice until I get consistent at being able to make that flat, even bottom and those nice tapered walls before I start shaping my clay into anything. Okay, so that's what you're going for.